My name is Ultan McMahuna and I'm chair of Education Support Centres Ireland. We were approached by Muscular Dystrophy Ireland to see could we help in putting together this webinar supporting primary school students with muscular dystrophy and related neuromuscular conditions. And delighted to do so. I just want everybody to know you will get a certificate in due course. Please don't contact ESCI in a few days' time. Where's my certificate? It will come to you. And just to let everybody know, this meeting is being recorded. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to knock off my sound and my camera, but I'll be here in case you need me for anything, Sinead. And I hand over to the very capable Sinead Glennon. Go ahead, Sinead.
Thank you, Alton. Thanks for that. Just on behalf of Muscular Dystrophy Ireland, we would like to welcome everybody here this evening and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar. My name is Sinead Glennon and I am part of the Muscular Dystrophy Ireland youth team. So the aim of tonight's webinar is to provide information and insight into supporting a young person with muscular dystrophy or related neuromuscular condition through their primary school journey. So we have some fantastic speakers this evening, and we will be introducing them very, very shortly. But firstly, myself and my colleague Una from Muscular Dystrophy Ireland just want to give a little insight into what muscular dystrophy is and the services that we provide. So just a little bit, what is muscular dystrophy or a related neuromuscular condition? So muscular dystrophies are a group of rare conditions that gradually cause muscles to weaken over time. They may also be referred to as neuromuscular conditions. These conditions may be inherited and are caused by changes or mutations in the genes which are responsible for the structure and function of our muscles. Muscular dystrophies and related neuromuscular conditions can be and may be progressive. So I'm just going to pass you over to Una, who's just going to give you a little background onto some of the service that we provide.
Thanks, Sinead, and good evening, everybody. My name is Una Sadler, and I'm a family support worker with Muscular Dystrophy Ireland. So who are MDI and what do we do? So MDI is a voluntary member-led organisation, and it was founded in 1972. We provide support to children and adults living with neuromuscular conditions and their families. Our vision is for people with muscular dystrophy and related neuromuscular conditions to be able to live in a society where they can participate fully and reach their potential. We provide information and support through a range of services. We advocate for services and entitlements for our members. We strive to educate and inform society about neuromuscular conditions. We also support researchers and clinicians to carry out quality research into neuromuscular conditions. So listed there on the slide is some of the services that we provide. One of them is the National Youth Support Service. We have the National Information and Advocacy Support phone line, the National Condition-Specific Information and Learning Events, a national conference which is going to be held in Croke Park on November 21st this year. We also have Connecting In with Others programme for adults, physical activity and wellbeing programme. There's also a schools awareness programme which this webinar is part of. There is the clinical and liaison service, counselling and psychological supports, personal assistance service which is short term, assistive technology and a guidance programme, independent living skills programme. We have the transport and loan equipment, and we also have our home from home apartment, which is located in Chapel Lizard in our head office, and that consists of 4 bedrooms and it's accessible accommodation. We also have the national advocacy support and both our research and fundraising departments.
Thanks, Una. I just meant to say there earlier on, if anybody has any questions throughout the presentations, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll have a chance for a discussion and to address them at the end. So tonight's speakers, so Sinead and Una, you've just met, that's ourselves. First up tonight, we will have Danielle Furlong, who's a senior occupational therapist in neuromuscular conditions. We will then hear from Dr. Laura Gallagher, consultant clinical neuropsychologist. We will then have Maeve O'Hanlon, who's a senior neuromuscular physiotherapist. And then we will hear from Conor McCauley, who's a disability advocate and content creator. So we'd like to welcome Danielle first up. Welcome, Danielle.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect, Danielle.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Furlong, and I'm working as a neuromuscular OT between Temple Street and Tala. I've been working in this field for some time, starting in South Africa and then moving to Ireland, where I worked in a Children's Disability Network team, and then move over to Children's Health Ireland. Furthermore, for this evening, I'll be using the person, environment, and occupational model to help think about the child holistically and not just about their diagnosis. So what is a neuromuscular condition? A neuromuscular condition is a disease or disorder that disrupts the communication between your nerves and your muscles, leading to problems like muscle weakness, muscle wasting, cramps, and difficulty with movement. These conditions can also affect breathing, swallowing, and they vary in severity from mild to life-threatening. Causes include genetic factors, autoimmune responses, and other health issues. Some of the examples include, but is not limited to, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, spinal muscular atrophy, or myopathies. So where does OT come in? So the role of the OT is to help the child stay independent, safe, engaged in everyday life as possible. We will ensure that the child can do activities that matter most to them, such as going to school, socializing with friends, and being included in school clubs and school trips. So like I said, we will be using the PEO model to describe this more in detail. So the PEO model is used to break down the child holistically, where you have the person, which is the child with their abilities, strengths, and needs. The environment is the classroom and the wider school context. This includes the physical layout of the school, social relationships, and policies. The occupation is everything the child needs and wants to do at school. That is learning, self-care, and play. So this will all include their daily occupations. Where these three areas overlap is where participation happens. So think of it as a triangle. So when we're looking at the person, each child will present differently. So we need to look closely at the unique profile. Physically, they may experience muscle weakness, fatigue, or fine motor difficulties. Cognitively, the child may have typical learning abilities, but fatigue and frequent hospital visits might impact the learning and also their concentration. Psychosocially, they may worry about fitting in or being different from their peers. Energy management should be considered as children may look fine, but become very tired throughout the day. And then the communication needs, so the use of assistive technology. The child might need breath support such as BiPAP. And then there's also the assistance, so the use of an SNA. This needs to be discussed before the child transitions into primary school, as it is extremely important that the child feels supported when entering the school on the first day, and not that everybody is running around looking at how we can best support the child. The environment can either support or create barriers to participation. So physically, classrooms and playgrounds may need to be adapted. So things like ramps needs to be installed in the school before the child transition. Supportive seating and an accessible toilet can make a huge difference, as the child will be more independent. And also it will give them a bit of confidence or independence, knowing that there is an accessible toilet that they can use, and that they don't have to hold in until they get home, because they feel more comfortable and that everything is there at home that they need to use. Socially, children needs understanding peers and teachers who promotes inclusion. So sometimes we use what we call a buddy system that has been proven to work well in the schooling environment. So then looking at the overall score, policies around attendance and policies around uniforms needs to be discussed. The child wearing clothing that's more comfortable and easier to use for toileting. Emergencies and safety are vital to ensure that the child is safe and supported. This also requires future planning. As the older the child gets, the more supports needs to be in place. So a school visit is normally completed by a CDNT ahead of time with the parents and the local team, like I said. And the child will also be there because they know what they need at that point in time. In this way, adaptations need to be put in place. And this will also take part in applying for funding regarding the adaptations. So we might look at what is needed now, but we also need to think long term as to when the child gets older, what needs to be in place instead of just thinking of the short term goal that they need right now. So when we're looking at occupation, we are thinking about what the child actually does at school. So academically, handwriting may be difficult, as they could experience cramps in their hands or they experience fatigue while writing longer pieces of work. So we would look at laptops or speech to text as alternatives. In terms of self-care, eating lunch, toileting may require extra time and support. Play is especially important for children as it is a meaningful occupation and is what they enjoy doing. So we want them to access the playground clubs and play with their friends, the games that they use on the playground, because we don't want them to be isolated in where they are watching their friends play, but we want them to be included in that playing as well. Because at the end of the day, they're still a child. We also need to be mindful about transition. So moving between the yard and toilet and the hall, that needs to be considered because it might take them a little bit longer to get to those different places, and they might need to use their wheelchair if they're not independently walking. When we're thinking of this, we need to think about how we can incorporate a child into PE and school activities so they can engage meaningfully and not just being physically present. So most children would say that they are not involved in the activities because they're in a wheelchair, or they feel that they're not able to do the activities their peers are doing. So we need to be mindful that they should also be included, even if the activity is adapted in some sort of way. So what we would normally do in this situation is if they are playing basketball or tennis or a ball game, we will allow the child to be active where they will be blowing the whistle, or they will be like a referee, or taking the amount of times they're running laps, or whatever else that you can think of that makes a child feel included in that activity. So the practical strategies that we can implement in the classroom. So we would adapt the task where needed. For example, let the child answer verbally instead of writing, if the writing is causing fatigue or muscle cramps. Build in rest breaks and be mindful of the fatigue levels. So we would normally recommend that the child's rest breaks should be done when they need it and not when it's scheduled for them. Encourage peers to be supportive and create opportunities for inclusion. And most importantly, collaborate with the parents, the OTs, the physios, and other health professionals, as you don't have to figure this out on your own, and it requires a multidisciplinary team. So, practical strategies for the teachers. So collaborate with the parents as they know their child best. Your local CDNT will also be able to provide recommendations and develop a plan. Regular reviews should take place as the child grows or the disease trajectory changes. transitioning to primary school is big, and this will require a whole team approach and will take roughly a year to start the preparation so that when the child is entering the school on the first day, everything is in place. From the accessible toilets to the ramps, lifts, everything will need to be in place before the child starts and not when the child is already in the school, as that can create a lot of anxiety and also being excluded because the school didn't think about all the things that they need in place. So the key message at the end of this presentation is we are not just focusing on only the condition, we are supporting the whole child. So with small thoughtful adjustment, children with neuromuscular conditions can fully participate in school life. So collaboration is vital for inclusion, participation, and success. So just a few questions like what challenges would you think you might face in a classroom when supporting a child with a neuromuscular conditions? And what ideas or strategies do you think would work well in your current school? Or what ideas or strategies you have currently in your school that are working well that you might be able to share with others? So I just put a little quote in here that for people with disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disability, technology makes things possible. So I would just like to end off with that note. Thank you very much. I think I'm done. Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you, Danielle. That was great. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker up is Laura. So Dr. Laura Gallagher, I'll let you take it away there.
Thanks very much, Una. So I'm Laura and I'm a psychologist. As part of my training, I've worked in lots of different areas of psychology, but my passion has always been working with children with physical needs. And particularly, I advocate for paediatric psychology service for all children with neuromuscular conditions. Every parent and child will experience that gradual transition in the first few years of life. In the early days, a child's circle is small, maybe just parents, close family, family friends, and gradually over time, this circle widens to all of the people who populate their days. And with every milestone, a child starts to take their place in the wider circle. Moving to primary school is an important milestone in every child and every parent's life. But there are unique challenges for a child with a neuromuscular condition and their family when they transition to primary school. And these challenges, they can be emotional and practical. When a child has a neuromuscular condition, typically parents learn about this in the early years. So parents of children who are starting into primary school and at the early stages of primary school are likely to still be in the early stages of receiving, learning about, and processing their child's diagnosis. And it's important to remember that parents often have to hold uncertainty and they're looking for information and for answers, and that these are uncharted and often choppy waters. Processing a diagnosis isn't a one-time event that happens in the hospital. It happens over time, and parents say that it can be like an experience of grief. Grief isn't only about bereavement, even though that's what we think of first. Grief is what we feel when something is lost. We experience grief in the loss of a relationship, even the loss of a job. For many parents, processing their child's diagnosis can mean grieving the loss of the expectations that they held about having a typical parenting journey. It can be helpful in trying to understand this experience, to think of it and to think of grief as like the sea. There are times when the sea is calm and times where it is entirely overwhelming and unpredictable. And much like waves, emotions can crash over a person. And these waves can come at any time, seemingly without warning. They can be intense and fleeting. And just like we can't stop the tide, we can't stop waves, we can't stop our grief. These things are important to hold in mind when we're supporting children with neuromuscular conditions and their families, particularly because milestones like starting primary school, communion, confirmation, graduation in 6th class, these can all be particularly big ways for parents to negotiate. As we said, the move to primary school widens a child's social circle. And that wider circle brings new people, new situations, and it often brings curiosity and questions. Questions like, do they like it if other children try to use their communication pad? How do they like lunchtime to go? Even kind, practical, logical, necessary questions can be exceptionally difficult for families to answer when their child has had a medical journey. Danielle gave us a good insight into how professionals try to support children with neuromuscular conditions and their families. One thing I think is very important for us to think about as thinking about a child's educational journey is remembering that when a child has motor needs, parents are asked to learn specific ways to handle, to position their child. Parents are asked to use specialist seating, specialist equipment. And as Danielle explained, the aim for all of these interventions and pieces of equipment is to promote a young child's ability to explore their environment, to promote their development and their independence. Equipment is offered to increase participation, to improve quality of life, and very often it's offered or prescribed to keep children safe. But what's important for all of us to remember is professionals are often asking families to use equipment before parents feel ready or feel able. And again, as Danielle explained, planning for the move to school and exploring all of the practical aspects of this can mean thinking about equipment needs or building needs. This can be a very difficult experience for families. For many families, the equipment itself is a symbol or a reminder of their child's experience of physical difference or developmental difference. We have the added complication that for many parents, they are experiencing a fight to access services and to access interventions. And what's so important when we're working with families is to remember that every day parents are fighting for and then accepting the types of supports that they never thought that they would need. Moving to primary school is a formal transition. It needs planning and collaboration between parents, schools, and relevant support services like the CDMTs. And again, as Danielle said, it's important to start thinking about that well before school is starting, and even a year before. It's a whole new world for families, particularly if this is their first child. They're learning a new language. They're learning CDNT, CNO, NCSE, funding prescriptions. And it's important that they have a chance to review the options for the ways in which their child can be supported. They will often need support to look at what supports are available and what ought to happen where. Above all else, what's needed is collaboration between local team, sometimes specialist supports as well as that, but between those professionals and education professionals and the family themselves. It's also incredibly important that the child is prepared. As Danielle said, a child themselves is best able to describe, when we give them the opportunities, what it is that they need. But sometimes we're trying to develop their independence a little bit before the rest of the system might be ready. While the move to primary school is a big milestone, it's only the first step in the primary school journey. Every year, a child experiences another transition to a new class, to a new teacher, maybe new peers, and always new learning challenges. One thing that's very important to remember is learning needs can be experienced by young people with neuromuscular conditions. And these learning needs, they tend to show themselves when academic demands increase. Very often, that's in first class and second class. What we know from research is that every child has a different learning profile. So every child is different. Every neuromuscular condition is different. And the experience for each child with a neuromuscular condition, we should expect that to be different too. The other thing that we know to expect is that there will be a varied cognitive profile. You might be familiar with getting psychology assessments, which talk about cognitive ability, overall cognitive ability, or the full scale IQ. What we'll often find is that that full scale IQ or overall cognitive ability can fall in the average range for a child. But what that average or what that overall score can sometimes hide is that there's areas of specific strength and areas of particular difficulty. This is especially important for all young people with neuromuscular conditions. It's really important that if they have an assessment, that it's an assessment that is wide enough and deep enough to look at all the cognitive strengths and difficulties. And it must look beyond IQ or overall cognitive ability. The other thing that research tells us is there are specific difficulties experienced. They can be executive function, planning, attention, working memory. They're also, as Danielle described, difficulties with motor speed and fatigue. There can be challenges with processing speed, particularly if it's spoken or oral processing speed. Other thing that's really important is when we think about working memory, attention, motor speed, processing speed, these are the cognitive skills that are the foundation for academics, like learning to read and learning how to comprehend what you read quickly. Another very important thing is, much like a cognitive assessment that focuses on overall IQ sometimes doesn't show the full picture. Equally, a diagnosis might not always describe a child's full experience or presentation. Or a child might have some challenges with their social experience, but they don't meet the criteria for an autism diagnosis, or theirs is not an autistic experience. That doesn't mean that the child doesn't have difficulties with their social experience. Neuropsychology assessment, its focus is looking at specific cognitive functions. but it also focuses on looking at the types of cognitive skills that might be underneath or underpin social and emotional challenges. I talked a little bit about executive function and how important that can be and how it can be a challenge in certain neuromuscular conditions for some young people. Executive functions are the skills that we use when we are regulating our emotions or our emotional experience. And difficulties with that can look like reacting more strongly than might be expected. Executive function is also very important when we're looking at regulating our behavior. And difficulties with that can look like impulsivity. Another very important piece is cognitive flexibility. So that's being able to move away from seeing a problem just one way and being able to look at it more broadly or creatively. A detailed assessment can be really valuable in understanding not just the types of difficulties that a young person experiences, but what might be underneath those difficulties, because that gives us an idea of how we can best support them. As all of you know, there's one thing we can all expect from children, and that's questions. As children mature and they move through primary school, they start to pay more attention to the differences between themselves and their siblings or their peers. And it's understandable that children might want to talk about those differences or their needs or their disability. Children can experience frustration due to the challenges that disabilities bring and may want to speak about those. And that's the children themselves who have a neuromuscular condition. That said, they are one child often in a class, and children by nature are curious, and school friends might ask why or why not, and they might look to you for answers. Answering these questions can be very difficult. We advise parents to access support, and that's why MDI provide psychology supports and therapeutic supports. But there is no rule book, there's no guide on what questions a child will ask or how they should be responded to. What we always advocate is that we're led by parents and that parents are led by their child. As teachers, you can work with parents while they can decide what type of information can be discussed, maybe discussed in the class or discussed with their child. You can help prepare this. We do know from clinical experience that times of transition from preschool to primary, from junior classes to senior classes, that heightens the experience of emotional needs. And the growing social groups and social maturity prompts new experiences, new dilemmas, and questions. There is no guidebook. Psychology support can be really important, particularly with these transitions, to help young people and their parents navigate their growing sense of themselves and the impact of their condition or medical needs. And psychology support can help a child or young person to understand how they want to describe their own story, their interests, their choices, and their experiences. Teachers cannot be expected to address these needs. But the lack of psychology resource in Ireland often means that it's teachers and the school that shoulder the impact. But the most important and impactful thing any teacher can do to support children and young people with neuromuscular conditions is to develop their awareness and to have sensitivity to the challenges that these children and young people experience. And your attendance here today shows your commitment to this, and that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Laura. Thank you. Next up, we have Maeve.
Sorry, just 1 second. Can you see my screen there?
Yep, maybe we can see it there.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Maeve and I'm a physiotherapist with the Neuromuscular service across CHI. Today I'm just going to give a brief look at physiotherapy and our role within this neuromuscular population. I'm also aiming to give a targeted focus on school and things that might be a barrier for a child with neuromuscular condition from a physio's perspective, and to provide some suggestions on how to address these, so that you might have a few takeaways from today's webinar. So physiotherapy for the neuromuscular service in CHI is part of the multidisciplinary team that look after children with neuromuscular conditions. So as you know, there's OT and psychology, and then there's other disciplines such as cardiology, respiratory, neurology, orthopedics on the team too. The physio service for the neuromuscular team enables families to access support from specialist physiotherapy at their clinic appointments, and also to provide one-to-one follow-up as needed. We provide support to the child, their families, and the local therapists on the local teams who see these kids on a more frequent basis. We monitor a child's function and aim to help advise and support them with any physical concerns or issues. We give advice on exercises, things to do, not to do, provide advice on participation in activities and environments, and recommendations on what equipment and adaptations might be needed. We also link in with the local therapists to help them problem solve and discuss any recommendations, advice, or plans that will be advised for them. That's just a really brief account on what physio as part of the neuromuscular service entails. Then the local physiotherapists are the physios who work in the community in the primary care or on the CDNTs, the children disability teams. They will usually just have a few children on their caseload with a neuromuscular condition, and sometimes even just one child. These are the faces you might meet when a physio or an OT does a school visit, or they're the ones that you might be in contact with over the phones and emails. These local therapists then link in with us in the neuromuscular clinic for recommendations, feedback from the clinic, and also for advice or support to help them in their management of the children on their caseload who have neuromuscular conditions. Okay. Neuromuscular conditions cover a broad range of conditions and therefore a spectrum of abilities. The one thing in common, although on very different levels, is that they all present with weakness and physical fatigue. There is a spectrum of other symptoms possible, of course. There are children with a high degree of needs in powered wheelchairs who will need a lot of adaptations and assistance. There are children who might be ambulant but might intermittently require wheelchairs or walkers and might need help for certain activities and in certain environments. And then there are those who are ambulant and their condition might seem more hidden, and they're often left to navigate themselves unless they look for help. And therefore they might mask or struggle a little bit more than you might initially realize. They still have fatigue and weakness, and situations just like, say, stairs or getting on and off a toilet or carrying a school bag, particularly at the end of the day, might be more difficult, for example. And there are strategies that can be put in place to make it easier, not only for the children with the more obvious needs, but also for those who only need help at certain times of the day. And I'll mention a few of these over the next few slides. So, as both Laura and Danielle have mentioned, the transition to primary school brings an increase in barriers and big changes to children with neuromuscular conditions in comparison to, say, their home environments or being in preschool or Montessori prior to that. There's an increased physical demand in primary school between the size of the buildings, the access points, so drop-off zones, parking bays, whether there's ramps or steps needed at the school door, etc. There's longer distances between classrooms and yards, and a longer day in school means an increased demand in physicality and energy required. PE is introduced, becomes more intense or demanding as time goes on, often requiring accommodating or adaptations for someone with a neuromuscular condition. School bags become a thing that children have to manage, and that's extra difficult when you have a walker or a wheelchair, or if someone's just not very steady on their feet. So just to be mindful of this and help where necessary, but not to take their independence either. And the school day tends to be longer, which means an increase in physical and mental fatigue in general, but particularly for this cohort who experience fatigue. SNAs are a new concept to parents, as the others mentioned, when kids are starting primary school. And just to bear that in mind, sometimes it's obvious just how much help is required from an SNA. At other times, it's a learning curve once that child starts school and new challenges are presented. The degree of assistance required by a child with a neuromuscular condition can vary over the years in primary school due to the significant progressive nature of the neuromuscular conditions. And therefore, the level of need has to be frequently reassessed or adapted in some cases, and it really should be tailored to the individual, because there really is no one size that fits all. So these are just a few things within the school environment that we might need to kind of think about and consider. So as physios, we look at things like in the school settings, such as things that would pose safety issues, falls risks, and the physical fatigue of the child. And we look to implement plans and strategies then. So for access points in and around schools, such as like steps or curbs, there might be a need for ramps for wheelchair access, or rails for those who are ambulant, because rails will make it a little bit easier for a child who's maybe a bit unsteady or at falls risk. And it might allow them a bit more independence rather than having to rely on an adult. When we consider stairs within the school environment, for anyone who struggles on the stairs at any time of the day, or if they're a child with a falls risk, or if they're using if they're using a wheelchair, they should have access to a lift. So if there's not a lift in the school, that one might need to be put in. If there is a lift there, then they need to have access to it either with a lift pass or access to someone very easily who has a lift pass. The surfaces around the school also need to be considered. They might be slippery or cobbly or stony or broken ground. They're going to be more challenging to balance or walk on, or even wheel over in a wheelchair. So it's considering things like alternative routes to avoid those, and if that's not possible, supervision or help provided in those instances. We also need to think about the distance between classrooms and the yard and the busyness of the schoolyard environment. Again, strategies should be implemented, such as like a child having supervision or help to navigate getting to the yard, and then being supervised in the yard in case of falls or needing help for a toilet break. Or they should be using their manual wheelchairs or power wheelchairs or walkers, depending on their needs, just to make it a little bit safer for them in such an environment. I mentioned school bags, and just for those starting with primary school, the bags are big, particularly in relation to their size. They're a new concept and they're very daunting to use. So it might even just be sometimes help putting it on the back of a wheelchair, or sometimes carrying the bag for a child at the end of the day who could fall with a heavy bag on their back. Then within the classroom setup and layout, sometimes there's ways of rearranging the furniture in a classroom just to give more space to a child with a neuromuscular condition to safely navigate their environment. And other times it's reorganizing it so that there's more furniture to hold on to. So again, it varies depending on the child. And an OT on a local team is pretty good at helping to figure that out. And bathrooms, from my side, just to consider the location and size of them from my perspective. So just a few other things here. Sorry, 1 sec. Sorry, 1 second. My computer's just acting up. Sorry, apologies. A few other bits of equipment pieces here. So as the others mentioned, rest breaks or movement breaks are to benefit the child both physically and mentally during the school day. And some of these children might spend a whole day in a wheelchair otherwise. They would really benefit from time out of that wheelchair. Not all want to do it, but they would benefit from it, to be out on a plinth, a mat, out in a stander, which is the one here up in the corner here. And the idea is for a little bit of a stretch, a change of position, and also that these like rest breaks are used for a physical and mental overload break in the classroom as well, to help them recharge and not overdo it. It's best to take these breaks as the child requires them, or else having a mix of scheduled breaks and breaks as the child requires, because scheduled breaks alone don't actually help manage their fatigue or aches or pains. Depending on the needs of the child, using the standards for a stretch or change of position might be ideal, might be something that kids might want to use or prefer to do in school rather than at home. Many kids with neuromuscular conditions wear these leg sprints that are up on the left-hand corner here. These are AFOs. Some of you may have come across these. They're put on to help reduce contractures, which is like a tightening of the muscles and tendons around the joints. Kids aren't necessarily always comfortable wearing these all days, but they have to sometimes wear them. They're quite rigid. They can pose a risk of skin breakdown. So sometimes the SNA is the person to help get them on and off for them, or maybe their teacher, because sometimes it's just not doable to wear them all day long. Something like a bench is another piece of equipment to kind of consider. A portable bench, I mean. So these are mainly for kids who are still ambulant or sometimes ambulant. They can be brought to PE or yard to provide a break, but it can also be a supporting surface for them to pull up on if they have a fall, and would actually be part of a falls and safety plan. PE is an area where a child might need help to participate, and that might be adapting exercises or programs for them to allow them to participate, or for example, if the rest of the class are running, that the child will not participate in the running part but could practice the skills, so dribbling a ball or something instead of doing all the laps, or even sometimes doing a completely separate exercise program that might include a couple of exercises and a couple of stretching exercises as well, and that can be requested normally from the local physiotherapist. And sorry, I just flicked ahead on one there on the bus one here. Yeah, school transport. Okay, so just a few more bits here, just in relation to school transport. We, the team, need to consider if a child can climb steps safely to get onto a bus. Can they manage a heavy bag on steps or tight spaces? Are they going to be going in a wheelchair on a bus? If they're going in a wheelchair, they should have a headrest by law. So they shouldn't be going on a bus without a headrest on a wheelchair if they need to sit in a wheelchair on a bus. If they're coming to school by car, if a child using a wheelchair or walker, if they can be dropped off as close as possible to the school, that's great, and it's space available, but often there isn't. So sometimes in situations it might be that if there is no disability space available, that maybe a child can be dropped off in the staff car park, or else that a member of staff comes out to meet them to help bring them in, so that the drop off can be a little bit easier for everyone. Another thing to think about is with regards to pacing. Some children are really good at recognizing their limits themselves, and others need a lot of help knowing when to take a breath, take a break, adapt an activity, etc. So you might just need to think about helping certain kids with knowing when to take a break. So these lists aren't exhaustive, but they probably just capture the main areas or issues. And you want to work closely with both parents and the local therapist to kind of help figure out what applies to the particular child that you might be working with. Okay. So for children at primary school age, you might witness a few versions or stages of a child with a neuromuscular condition. For example, a child with a myotonic dystrophy will be slow to gain gross motor skills in the first place. So you might see them continue to progress in the earlier years and then plateau. They'll have difficulties, but they might have more difficulties earlier and improve a little bit as time goes on and then plateau. On the opposite side of this is a child, say, for DMD, for example, who will achieve their gross motor skills earlier and then begin to lose them from around second class. And therefore their level of help actually increases, whereas some others, it might actually slightly decrease. So it really does vary. The aim is to link in with their local teams, get the therapist in for school visits and consultations as required. Bear in mind that adaptations in the school for a child with a neuromuscular condition can evolve over their years in primary school, so their needs change. And the environment should be adapted as soon as possible to let kids be kids, and to help reduce the disease burden and allow them to participate in school life as best as they can. Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat box for the end of the webinar. Thanks very much. Just going to stop sharing now.
Thanks so much, Maeve. Okay, and our final speaker tonight, Connor.
Thanks, guys. I'll just share my screen now. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of a problem sharing my screen. It's just saying my sharing's not turned on now.
It should work for you now, Connor.
Thank you. Now, can everybody see that?
Yes, Connor, that's perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, perfect. Okay, so Hi everybody. I'm just going to be talking today about myself really, as I'm a young adult living with a neuromuscular condition, and I'm sort of just going to be giving guidance on what I think is supportive and inclusive to someone who is living with a neuromuscular condition themselves. I'm a disability advocate and also a content creator. So you may be wondering, who am I? Well, I'm Connor McCauley. I'm a 24-year-old disability advocate and content creator. I'm living with a neuromuscular condition and it's called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Through my work as both an advocate and a creator, I do use social media to share my story and raise awareness about my condition, as well as the wider challenges faced by the disabled community. I'm passionate about using my platform to challenge stereotypes and promote better understanding of disability in everyday life. Beyond my content creation, I've been actively involved in media, youth, and policy work, representing Ireland at inclusion events across Europe. These experiences, they have sort of allowed me to contribute to important conversations around inclusion and accessibility, but through everything I do, I always say my aim is to build a more inclusive and understanding world. What will I be discussing? Well, today I'll be sharing my perspective on what I believe is important for someone with a neuromuscular condition in a school environment, particularly those who live with Duchenne, as I live with Duchenne myself. And I'll be focusing on what can make a real difference to a student's experience both inside and outside the classroom. And for my final point on this slide, I'm going to talk about not everyone being the same. What I mean by this is I've sort of been fortunate in how my condition has progressed, but it's important to recognize that everyone's experience is different. People with neuromuscular conditions can experience progression at very different stages and in very different ways. Even among people with the same condition, no two journeys are identical, and having a disability doesn't mean your experience will mirror somebody else's. Because of this, I always think it's very important to focus on the individual and their specific needs rather than making assumptions based on a diagnosis. Balance is very important. Having a balanced approach to school, I feel, is really, really, really important, especially at primary level. Children with neuromuscular conditions are already dealing with daily challenges, so school should be a supportive and enjoyable environment, not something that adds extra pressure into that child's life. At this age, school isn't just about academics, it's also about play, friendships, and social development. From my own experience living with Duchenne, I believe it's important that children are included in all aspects of school life, not just focused on their learning. The balance is key, and it definitely helps build confidence, and it definitely helps that child have a sense of belonging. It is also important to recognize that every child learns differently. I personally found certain areas of learning, like memory and processing information, quite challenging. Duchenne can sometimes be linked with developmental or learning differences. In my case, I do have dyslexia. This does show that it's not just the physical side of a condition that may have its effects. There can also be other challenges that aren't visible. Early understanding and planning. One of the most important things a school can do is take their time to properly understand the child before they even start. A neuromuscular condition isn't something you can fully prepare for by reading a report or looking it up online. Real understanding comes from listening to the child and their family. Every child will have their own needs, routines, and a way of doing things. Taking the time early on to learn what works best for them can make a huge difference to how comfortable and confident they feel in school. Simple things like classroom layouts, access to facilities, rest breaks, or support during certain activities can all be planned in advance. When these supports are already in place from day one, it allows the child to settle in much easier and focus on being a part of the classroom or being a part of that class group. Without that early planning, small issues can quickly become daily challenges. Having to constantly adjust things during the school day can be very frustrating for the child, and it can make them feel singled out. Getting it right from the start creates a smoother, more positive experience for everyone involved. Mental health. Even at primary school level, mental health and emotional well-being are extremely important. Children should feel safe and supported, and they should never feel like a burden. It's important that they know there is always someone they can talk to, even if they are worried or upset. There should be a trusted adult in a school that the child feels comfortable going to. This shouldn't always be their SNA, as I feel like it's important the child has another person they can turn to if needed. I feel building trust with this person over time is really important. I also think it's beneficial for a staff member to have some understanding or training around disability and emotional support. The reason why I say it should not be their SNA is because if they have a problem, say with their SNA or the way that their SNA is doing something for them, they aren't going to them telling them about it. So they have that other person that they can go to. Because from my own experience, having someone who understands your situation and can listen properly and not be an SNA can make a huge difference. Um, it's always with the child's comfort and consent in mind as well. And of course, that's involving the parents. The parents, of course, get to know, but I just feel like the child needs to be safe in this situation as well. So PE and the need to feel included. Well, physical education is an important part of the school day for all children. It's not just about sport, it's about participation, confidence, and being part of a group. However, children with neuromuscular conditions can sometimes be unintentionally left out or treated as an afterthought during PE. It's really important that schools put simple but meaningful plans in place so every child can feel included. This doesn't always mean taking part in the physical activity itself. It could be small roles like helping to run part of the session, choosing or controlling the music, keeping score, or helping with refereeing in a game. These roles, I feel, make the child feel involved and valued. At times during the year, inclusive sports sessions can also be a great learning opportunity. Inviting someone to demonstrate wheelchair sports like wheelchair basketball or wheelchair rugby can be a fun and eye-opening experience for all students. It helps build understanding, curiosity, and it makes the kids respect people who have disabilities. If a child doesn't feel comfortable in taking part in PE, I think that's completely okay as well. However, they should still be included in a way, but not simply removed from the class. There should always be a meaningful alternative. In my own experience, I was sometimes told that if I wasn't taking part, there was no reason for me to be there, and I would be sent to do work elsewhere. This made me feel excluded and upset at the time, and it's definitely not the right approach. Every child should feel like they belong, even if they are participating in a different way. This was for me a long time ago now, so I really do hope the school system has really improved on this. But sometimes the best alternatives might actually be activities like board games or computer-based learning, such as computer games, reading or homework. But of course, these are the child's choice, really, I think, anyway. But they can really still keep the mind active while allowing the child to remain part of the school environment. School trips. School trips are an important and exciting part of primary school life. They help children learn outside the classroom and make memories with their classmates. Because of this, it's really important that accessibility is planned from the very beginning. Transport, support, and access should always be considered early so that no child has to worry about whether they can go. No child should ever feel unsure or anxious about being able to take part in a school trip because of accessibility issues. If a trip is not fully accessible, it should not automatically be assumed that the child does not want to go. Instead, they should be asked and included in the conversation, even if their role is different on the day. From my own experience, the arrangements often had to be discussed separately, and sometimes my parents would need to organize accessible transport themselves. As a child, you definitely do notice these things, and it can feel very upsetting. I was lucky that my mother was able to help me when needed, but sometimes it made me feel like I was causing extra work compared to my classmates because it was my parents doing it and not the school. And residential trips, both local and international, are another important area to think about. I know residential trips wouldn't come up much so in primary school, but that sort of transition from primary school to secondary school, I think this is a big thing. Whenever it is possible, I feel like the children with neuromuscular conditions should be given the opportunity to attend. And if it's not possible, that should be for a clear and practical reason, not because assumptions were made. Every effort should always be made to explore solutions first, then just presuming the child can't go because they have a neuromuscular condition. Friendship and inclusion in the classroom. One of the most important parts of primary school life is making friends and feeling like you belong. For children with neuromuscular conditions, this can sometimes be more challenging, not because of ability, but because of how others include or understand them. Teachers play a really important role in setting the tone for inclusion in the classroom. Small things like encouraging group work, making sure no one is left out during activities, and just in general promoting kindness and understanding, I feel can make a huge difference to a child's experience. It is also important that classmates are taught in a simple and age-appropriate way about differences. When children understand why someone may do something differently or need extra support, they are much more likely to be kind, inclusive, and supportive. Inclusion, I feel as well, should not feel forced, it should feel natural. Every child should be given the chance to take part in friendships, group activities, and classroom life in a way that suits them. Feeling included socially, I feel, is just as important as being included academically. So I just want to say to everybody, thanks so much for listening. I've really appreciated it, and I do, as I say, use social media platforms. I'm a content creator, so you can scan the QR code there if you want, for Instagram or LinkedIn. If you want to, of course, follow me on my journey on Instagram, you can do that. Or if you want to have a more professional relationship through LinkedIn, you can, of course, scan that QR code. Thanks very much, everybody, and I really appreciate it again. Thanks.
Thank you, Connor. So yeah, thanks to all our speakers for being with us this evening. And just to mention that the link for tonight's PowerPoint presentation, along with further in-depth information and resources, is going to be on our website. That's www.mdi.ie. So I'm just looking there at a few questions that have come in on the chat. So what type of psychological services are available for older children who are finding it difficult with their regulation, for example, their emotions, anger, and anxiety?
I'll take that unless
Thanks, Laura.
you jump in. The types of psychology supports that can and should be available are often very similar to the types of supports that kids who have emotional or behavior regulation needs and don't have a neuromuscular condition. So ideally that can be access to primary care psychology, or to CAMS sometimes. And when we think about inclusion, it's important that we know that all of the services that we provide should be accessible to those with a neuromuscular condition and those who don't have that. It is, though, as I think everything that we've said, and probably most importantly, Connor's kind of input today, there are particularly unique challenges if you have a neuromuscular condition, and sometimes it can be really valuable to have that psychology support from somebody and a team that have good awareness of the medical challenges and the social and emotional challenges. There is what was limited access, but will be growing access to psychology support within the neuromuscular clinic on a national level. And very often what happens in reality is if a young person is attending primary care or is attending CAMS, the psychologist or occupational therapist who's working with them would often link in with the specialist teams to develop that insight. I think it was Maeve who said earlier, it's very often that on a local team, you might have therapists who've only experienced, working with one person with Duchenne or one person with SMA. And so that consultation is just as important from a psychology point of view as it is from a physio. But I suppose it would be remiss to say that we have easy access to those things. I think everyone will be aware that there's a lot of resource shortages, and that means that often the resources aren't there when you need them. But I suppose what we need to keep on doing is highlighting the need and looking for them in all of those places.
Thank you, Laura. We have another question there, just in relation to a child getting a taxi to school. So, a child in junior infants is getting a taxi to school, but they don't have a headrest on their chair. What do you suggest? Maeve, do you want to take
Yeah,
that?
I just realised that I wrote required by law. It's recommended. We would also, I suppose, recommend it. If you think about sitting in a regular car seat or bus seat, you tend to have a headrest behind you. It's just for obviously if a crash happens, that you have something for your head to go back against. It's really important for a child to have a headrest on their wheelchair if they have any kind of issues with head control. Some kids who don't have issues with head control will opt not to have a headrest on their wheelchair, but it's the same as putting someone into just a regular car seat without any sort of headrest behind them. It's not ideal. So I should have said recommended as opposed to required. So, in that instance, I don't know if that child is in a manual or a power wheelchair. I'd hope they're only in a manual if they don't have any kind of headrest on their wheelchair. It can be the decision of the family not to have a headrest, but it would be really encouraged even if they just had it on for the sake of being in the car and they can take it off otherwise. So yeah, it might just be getting back in touch with maybe the local team to check and see what the situation is. But yeah, apologies, meant to say recommended, not required.
Thank you, Maeve. I think we have one more question there. Okay, I recognize you touched on comorbid conditions for students with MD. Can you elaborate on this, please? Is it very common to have processing issue, cognitive challenge delay with muscular dystrophy or similar conditions?
I'll take that one again.
Thank you, Laura.
It's going to sound like a typical psychology response, like sitting on the fence, but it really is hard to answer that in an absolutist way. It's so important that for every young person with a neuromuscular condition that we appreciate that there's research that will help us know what some of the cognitive profiles are that are associated with specific conditions, but that it is very varied within that. So what I will say, and I think Conor touched on it as well, there is a higher prevalence of neurodevelopmental diagnoses such as autism and ADHD. There's also a higher prevalence of OCD in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and in Becker's muscular dystrophy. I am a neuropsychologist, so this is always going to be my interest as well, but I talked a lot about executive function and how some of those things can underlie what we see as diagnoses. So, we might have that somebody has an experience of dyslexia, but the background to why they experience dyslexia, it can actually be because of their working memory and their processing speed. So we've so much evidence that tells us that if you struggle with your processing speed, that the demands of reading and trying to comprehend and hold in mind what you're reading and then answer questions on that, either written or orally, that can be incredibly challenging if you have difficulties with processing speed or working memory. So for that reason, you're more likely to experience dyslexia if you have the executive function difficulties that are common, experienced in many different neuropsychological profiles, but it is more common in Duchenne. There is also things like the flexibility of thought. So how we might be more likely to stick with one way of doing things rather than to move and to shift. That's something that develops over time for children. And if you have difficulty with that, it can have an impact on how you experience social situations, because what we do know is that they're incredibly fluid, particularly with younger kids. So it's not possible to give, anyone who gives you a quick answer on that is lying. There isn't one profile, there isn't, the evidence isn't even there to tell us that you should definitely expect this. But what it does do is underlie that if we want to truly be inclusive and we want to maximize every young person's ability, we should learn not only what research tells us might be difficult for them, but what is actually difficult for them. And then we learn why and what we can do about it. And again, I would say this, but that's why we would recommend neuropsychology assessment and then tailored supports as well.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our questions. And Laura, thank you so much. Really appreciate your feedback there. That's just from the comments there. And yeah, Connor, you have a comment here as well. That somebody's daughter met you at Christmas. They know you from your online presence, and they were delighted to have met you. So there you go, Connor. That's fantastic.
That's brilliant.
And
Thanks so much.
there you go. And Connor, you're an absolutely brilliant and such an inspiration. So there you go, Connor. There's another one for you. So I think we have all the questions there addressed. So we would just like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. We hope you found it informative and that everybody got something from it. Again, it's mdi.ie for any other further information, and contact us if anyone has any further questions. So a very special thank you to all our speakers. So we had Dr. Laura Gallagher, Maeve O'Hanlon, Danielle Furlong, and of course, Conor Macaulay. And again, thank you to Ulton and to ESCI for supporting us and hosting this webinar for us. So thank you very much, everybody.
Sinead, if you make those slides available to us, we can send them on to participants if that suits you.
Fantastic.
I know
we
there
can
was
do
one
that,
question
yeah.
in the chat about that, so if they're made available,
yeah.
we can send them on. It won't be today or tomorrow, guys, but in a week's time maybe. Our admin person is out at the moment, so to be a wee while. Okay, so look, without further ado, I'd like to thank everybody, fair play to the people who attended, and mila buchas to gachéine an seo an glár anocht. Mila mahagav,